بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وخاتم النبيين الحبيب المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته الكرام المنتجبين. All the praise is due to God, the Lord of the universe, and may the peace and the blessings be upon Prophet Muhammad and upon his purified progeny and the believers of his companions. And may the peace and the blessings be upon all of you brothers and sisters. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We continue with our Qur'an study. We'll study a few verses tonight. We start with verse 48. I'll read the Arabic as usual, and Muhammad Rida will read the English. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وكأي من قرية أمليت لها وهي ظالمة ثم أخذتها وإلي المصير.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. How many townships have I given ample of time while they were unjust, then I seized them, and to me is the final destination.
The Quran is repeating a fundamental concept that was already mentioned in verse 45 in the same chapter. We discussed it last night. That peaceful life cannot continue and not sustainable with injustice. And the outcome of injustice is destruction. This is a very fundamental rule. It's a general rule, and it applies to everyone, whether they are believers or non-believers. Life really is not sustainable with injustice. And when you study the history of the world, you can see a lot of examples when injustice could not last for long. Now, God is referring, also mentioning his mercy here as well. Before anything happened to a community or to an individual, God would give them ample of time for them to contemplate, to think, to repent, and to amend what they have done, to do some damage repair, to fix their wrongdoings. But if they do not, if they persist in their injustice, of course there will be an outcome. Remember, we talked about an outcome, not punishment. There will be an outcome that they will be destroyed or perish because of their own injustice, not because of something else. It is because of their own actions, the wrongdoings. They will perish. So that would be an outcome because of their own actions. And obviously, we believe that the destiny of everyone is that going back to God. Everyone in this world will return to God. All right, verse 49. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان قل يا أيها الناس إنما أنا لكم نذير مبين.
O Muhammad, say, O people, I am sent to you as an evident warner.
So God tells the Prophet, tell people about your mission. What are you doing? You are a warner. Of course, based on other verses of the Quran, the Prophet is someone who gives glad tidings and a warner. The next verses will explain more, will give us more idea about this. But in this verse, it said a warner because the context is about warning those who do injustice. Remember the previous verse, how many townships that God has given them ample of time, but they insisted in their injustice, then they perished as an outcome of their actions. So that's a form of warning. And the Quran is full of glad tidings for the believers and those who do good, and for those who fight the faith. So this verse is talking about the nature of the mission of the Prophet, that he is a warner, and we will know in a minute that he is also someone who gives a glad tiding. Verse number 50, فَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَهُمْ مَغْفِرَةٌ وَرِزْقٌ كَرِيمٌ.
Those who believe and do good deeds, for them is forgiveness and generous provision.
Yes, those who believe and do good, they do good deeds. There is forgiveness, of course, and generous provision in this life and in the hereafter. And remember the fundamental equation of salvation in the faith of Islam. To believe in the principles, to believe in God and the message and the prophets and the hereafter, these are the principles of the faith, and to do good as well. So we have mentioned this many times. The Quran keeps repeating this fundamental equation of salvation based on two elements: believing and practicing at the same time, believing and practicing and doing good. Those who believe and practice, the Prophet gives a glad tiding. This is an example of a glad tiding, that they, in this life and in the hereafter, they will receive forgiveness and also generous provisions. Rizqun Kareem. All right. Verse 51. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. والذين سعوا في آياتنا معاجزين أولئك أصحاب الجحيم.
Whereas those who strive against our revelations for the purpose of misleading others, they will be companions of the fire.
So this is warning again. Warning against those who, in fact, engage in a combat against the faith and the faithful. Those who try to create obstacles toward promoting religion or awareness, toward creating obstacle in the way of educating people through bullying, through harassment, through violent acts, or creating false accusations against the Prophet, revelation, God, or the Muslims. There is warning against them, that the Quran warns them that they will be the companions of the fire. Verse 52. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. وما أرسلنا من قبلك من رسول ولا نبي إلا إذا تمنى ألقى الشيطان في أمنيته فينسخ الله ما يلقي ثم يحكم الله آياته والله عليم حكيم.
Never we sent a messenger or a prophet before you, but when he thought of a wish, Satan threw obstacles into his wish. But God abolished that which Satan threw, and God confirms his sign, for God is all-knowing and all-wise.
This verse will take most of our discussion tonight, because there was a lot of controversy and fake stories about this verse. And tonight I will basically present the both sides. One side is what all commentators from all the school of thoughts, Sunnis and Shias, have mentioned what does this verse mean. And then referring to a fake story about this verse that, again, all Muslims agreed that it is a fake story. I will mention them for your information because it is mentioned in some of the books, and especially it is mentioned in many books written by Orientalists. So you get to know what is the background of that story. So side one side of this story that almost all Muslims have agreed on. The meaning is that prophets are just like other humans. They have their own dreams, visions, and wishes. What would a prophet or a messenger dream of? First of all, it says, never we sent a messenger or a prophet. What is the difference between a messenger or a prophet? Very briefly, a messenger who brings a message from God. He receives the revelation and he has a message for his people from God. A prophet receives a revelation but does not have a message. He basically promoting or teaching a message of another prophet. This is an example. This is what the difference between a messenger and a prophet. An example of that, Prophet Musa, alayhi salam, and his brother Aaron. Aaron was a prophet. Musa was a messenger. He brought a message. He received a message. Aaron was a prophet as well, but he would teach the same message that his brother Musa has received. This is just a clarification about who is a prophet and who's a messenger. So a prophet or a messenger, throughout history, the verse says, before you, Prophet Muhammad. This applies to all the prophets before you. When they get to wish, what kind of wishes they would have? Of course, for a prophet, he would wish that his mission, his ministry would not fail in front of the fighting and combating of the pagans or those who are against the faith. For example, during the first war that was waged against Muslims in Medina, we've talked about this in some more details. Pagans mobilized an army of 1,000 strong and marched 250 miles from Mecca toward North Medina. Their Muslims, they were outnumbered by the army of the pagans. They were 313 versus 1,000 strong. Of course, that was worrisome. Muslims were worried. The Prophet himself was worried. So he prayed to God. He made a dua. He said, Allahumma in tahlak hadhihi al-asaba falan tu'bada fil ard. Almighty God, if this small group or small army would be defeated, you would never be worshipped on earth. So his wish was that God would grant victory to this smaller group. And this is what God has given them, because God has promised in the Quran that he would defend the believers. So this is the wish of prophets, messengers, that their message continues, their missions continues even after their death. It lasts forever. That's the wish. Now, the Quran says, Satan on the other side does not like this fact, does not like the fact that the prophets would like their mission to continue and to gain, growth and victory. So what he would do his best, tries his best to create obstacles to defeat the mission of the prophet by inspiring or deceiving his followers to fight against Muslims or to create confusion and create conflict. For example, and there are many examples, when Prophet Musa, peace be upon him, left Egypt with his people, and they crossed the sea, they arrived in Sinai Peninsula. There, Musa's followers came across a group of people, pagans, who used to worship idols. They asked Musa, they came to Musa and they said, we want a God just like those, a God we can see, a God we can touch, a God we can feel like those. That's what the Quran says, فَأَتَوْا عَلَىٰ قَوْمٍ يَعْكُفُونَ عَلَىٰ أَصْنَامٍ لَهُمْ. They came across a tribe or a group of people who worshipped their own idols. قَالُوا يَا مُوسَى. They told, his followers told Prophet Musa, اجعل لنا إلها كما لهم آلهة. You make for us a God just like those who have their gods they can see. Musa, of course, said, قال إنكم قوم تجهلون. You are still live in ignorance. So what made those people say that after all this struggle, after all this education, after all fighting of Pharaoh and also followers of Pharaoh, Satan motivated them. And later, of course, he motivated them to worship the golden calf, as it is mentioned in the Quran and in the Bible as well. So back to this verse. Prophets, their wish and their vision for their ministry, for their mission to survive, to growth, to seek growth, to grow and expand. Satan on the other side would do his best to defeat this purpose, to deceive people. However, it says later in the verse, فَيَنْسَخُ اللَّهُ مَا يُلْقِي الشَّيْطَانِ. Of course, God is on top of everything. God would not allow the plans of Satan to succeed. God would abolish what kind of obstacles Satan would create. An example I already mentioned in the Battle of Badr, the first battle that the pagans waged against Muslims. The Muslims were outnumbered, but they gained victory because God had promised them. You remember an early verse we read in verse 38, we read in this chapter, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُدَافِعُ عَنِ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. God defends those who believe. That's a promise. So God will not let Satan to win. Yes, there will be a struggle. It is not easy. It has not been easy for the prophets. Today, it's not easy for people of faith to promote, to hold to their faith and educate others. There is always a struggle. That's the nature. But God says, with all this struggle, I'll take the side of the believers. I'll help them. I'll support them. So God would cancel, would abolish the plans of Satan, ويحكم آياته ثم يحكم الله آياته والله عليم حكيم. God would confirm his verses, his promises that he made. I already mentioned that he made a promise that he would defend the believers. God deliver on his promises. Wallahu alimun hakim. God is all-knowing, all-wise. So this is the true side of the meaning. This is something all Muslims agreed on. You read all the books of commentary, this is what they say about this verse. What is the other story that, again, all Muslims believe it is fake, it is a false story, but it has been mentioned somehow. I have researched, but could not find who was the first one to mention it. I saw a reference to a commentator known as Suyuti. He did mention it, but he, at the same time that he mentioned it, he said this is false. Just like what I am doing tonight. I am mentioning this story, but I am saying it is false as well. Anyway, the story says the Prophet, one day he was sitting in the Grand Mosque and praying or reciting the Quran. And there were many Muslims and non-Muslims as well. The pagans were there, including their leaders. And the story continues to say that the Prophet was thinking about maybe God would say something to please these pagans. Maybe God will not say something that would displease them. I don't know how those who narrated this story got to know about what the Prophet would think. Anyway, they say, so God revealed to the Prophet chapter 53, al-Najm, or he was reciting again this chapter during his prayer. And he came to verse 19 and 20, which says, أَفَرَأَيْتُمُ اللَّاتَ وَالْعُزَّى. Have you seen Lat, the Lat and the Uzza? Those are two idols, main or major idols that they were in Kaaba. And then the verse after says وَمَنَاةَ الثَّالِثَةَ الْأُخْرَى. And Manat now is a goddess. It seems it is a female god. وَمَنَاةَ الثَّالِثَةَ الْأُخْرَى. And the third major goddess is Manat. These two verses are mentioned in chapter 53, verses 19 and 20. What is not mentioned is this, that after he mentioned these two verses, Satan influenced him in a moment of weakness, or a moment that he was always sleeping or tired. So he said two verses that God did not tell him. Gabriel did not bring these two verses. And these two verses are تِلْكَ الْغَرَانِيقُ الْعُلَى وَإِنَّ شَفَاعَتَهُنَّ لَتُرْتَجَى. Those are the highest gods. And there is a hope that they will save people. This is the meaning of these two verses. Of course, these two verses are not mentioned in the Quran. The story says the Prophet said them, or Satan made a voice, just it sounds like the voice of the Prophet, and he mentioned these two verses. تلك الغرانيق العلا وإن شفاعتهن لترتجى. And then the Prophet continued. This is the false story that I am talking about. The Prophet continued with this chapter until the end. At the end, this chapter has a verse that includes sujda. This is one of the chapters that they included a verse. Sujda, prostration, is mandatory when somebody hears or read this verse. He recited that last verse of this chapter. He made sujood, he prostrated. With him, all the believers and pagans as well, they made sujood. Believers, of course, that was part of the revelation. Non-believers, when they heard what the Prophet said, praising the idols, تلك الغرانيق العلا, those the high idols, and there is a hope that they save people, help people in intercession on the hereafter. They became happy. They said, finally, the Prophet has mentioned our idols, praised them and mentioned them in a good manner. They made the sujood with it. So the narration said everybody there in the mosque, they made prostration. The event end here. The Prophet went home at night. Prophet Gabriel came and told him to recite that chapter again. So the Prophet recited that chapter again with these two verses. Gabriel told him, where you got these two verses from? I didn't give you these two verses. These are what Satan has told you. So the Prophet regret what happened. He was very sad in a story that I'm still quoting what this false story has mentioned. And then this verse came, this verse that we studied today, verse 52 in chapter 22, that never before you a messenger or a prophet wished except the Satan would throw obstacles in their wishes, and then God would cancel what Satan has thrown and confirm his own verses. The story ends here. By all counts of all Muslims, narrators, this story is not compatible with the spirit of the Quran, with the nature of the Prophet's mission for many reasons. I will mention a few reasons right here why this is, we consider, and all Muslims consider, to be false. We may continue the discussion tomorrow if there is a need, because we already came to the end of half an hour. Number one, the chapter they talk about, chapter 53, Surah Al-Najm, in the beginning of that chapter, verse number 3 and 4, it says, وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. Prophet Muhammad would not say something out of his own personal desire. إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. It is, in fact, a revelation that is sent down to him from God. This is very clear. In the beginning of this chapter, it says, the Prophet would not say something from his own. Everything in the Quran is actually a revelation word by word. So there is no way for the Prophet to say something that is from his own or from anyone else. This is what the Quran says. Another verse, it says, and there are many of them. I have to make it short because we don't have time. It says, "Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidun." We have sent this revelation, this Quran, and we will protect it. We will protect it from, having additional verses or missing any verses. It will be protected. This is what we believe. The Quran we have today is exactly the same Quran that was revealed to the Prophet, word by word, letter by letter. And you can go, in fact, anywhere on earth. You go to China, you go to a mosque in Africa, in Europe, in Middle East, here in the United States, and open any Quran in Arabic. They are all the same. No missing letter, no additional or no missing a letter. This is the promise of God. The same God that was presented to the Prophet 14 centuries ago. It is right here in front of us. And in fact, science already has approved that. There was a print that they found, I think 2-3 years ago, by one major Western university. They examined this by their own technology, and they found that it goes back to the time of the Prophet or a little bit after that, and exactly the same Quran that we have. So that's another reason that we believe that this is very fake. But the most powerful reason, brothers and sisters, is included in chapter 53. They claim that the Prophet praised the idols, Gharaneeq. By the way, the word Gharaneeq is a plural. Singular is Gharnook. Gharnook is a white, a beautiful bird that flies high. So this is a metaphor that they say the Prophet used to refer to idols who possibly, their shape, one or two, was not like a human, it was like an eagle or like this bird. So one of the shape of the idols looked like this bird. So the fake verse, false verse is referring to that the Prophet in these two verses, he praised them. But listen what the revelation says right after these fake and false verses. It says, I'm quoting the Quran, "In hiya illa asma'a sammaytumuha." Those idols, these names, Al-Lat, Al-Uzza that we already mentioned, Lat, Uzza, two idols, Manat, the goddess, those are names you have created, you have invented. Sammaytumuha antum wa abakum. You and your fathers made these names, you brought them. Ma anzal Allahu biha min sultan. God has never sent down an authorization or authority for such names. These are man-made names. In yattabi'una illa dhann. They are actually following an imagination. That's their imagination. That's not a true. So imagine the contradiction here. At two verses, the fake verses, these two fake verses would praise these three idols, and in verse number 23, writes is actually rejecting these names and rejecting these idols. Does not make sense at all. So this is why we believe this is a false story that was created. Commentators mention it because it was there. So they would mention it and say why it is false. However, a lot of Orientalists has made a lot of stories about this, that we Muslims, all Muslims, believe that this was a fake story. by this we end our discussion for today. We'll continue inshallah tomorrow afternoon. If you have any question or comment, you may raise it now, or you can send us an email or a message that I can answer it later, inshallah.
So there's one question here.
Yes.
Says, if the story is not real, why even bring it up? Is it not better to just narrate the correct version?
Yes, of course. This is what I thought why it was mentioned. I brought it because, you know, somebody might read a book of, you know, or somebody who wrote one of those Orientalists and say about this story, and then he say, look, Muslims do not even mention this. They totally ignoring this. When we re-mention it, is to not as that we accept it. In fact, we want to say that this is fake and how it is fake. How it is fake. So somebody will read this story somewhere, and he or she wants to do a research. He might or she might read it in a college, in a school, in a book, whatever. And they need to read hear the response to why this is untrue. So when we mention this story, in fact, we are mentioning the proof and the evidence that this is false story. And there are many others evidences. Why they have mentioned it in, you know, earlier, I really don't know. Maybe for the same reason. Maybe there was a discussion between a group of people, and somebody decided to say, hey, here there is a fake story, a rumor that some people are mentioning, and we would like to say that this is not true, and these are the reasons why they are not true. So mentioning a fake story, not to promote it, but to list the counter evidence for that fake story.
I have a question.
Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. Is Hazrat Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is a prophet or messenger, or both?
So the Quran actually refers to him with both terms. Ya ayyuhan nabiyyu inna arsalnaka. The prophet, the Quran calls him as a prophet, and also at the same time as a messenger. So, in fact, I should have said that every prophet, every messenger is a prophet as well.
Mm-hmm.
This is the general rule. Every messenger is a prophet as well, but not every prophet is a messenger. So yes, the prophet and the messenger, Prophet Muhammad or Rasul Muhammad, he was a messenger and a prophet at the same time. But not every prophet is a messenger. Yes.
Okay.
He was both. Yes.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. If
Thank
there
you
is
very
any
much.
other.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you to all for joining. If there is any question, will wait for a few seconds. If not, I'll recite the dua for the healing of everybody and for the protection of everybody as well. All right, Almighty Allah, we ask you, as this is almost the end of the day 12 of this noble month of Ramadan, we ask you to accept our deeds and our fasting. If you have not granted us forgiveness so far during this month, we ask you to grant us forgiveness and your pleasure during the remaining days and nights of this month of Ramadan. We ask you to protect everyone on this earth from this pandemic. We ask you to help those who are going through a lot of hardship because of this pandemic. to give healing to those who are ill and sick, and to send the pleasure to the soul of those who departed. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.